Welcome to the Tinfoil Rabbit Hole. My name is Steve. I'm coming to you, of course, from deep down within our tinfoil rabbit hole. This podcast is brought to you by the Insensitive Network. You can find it on their website, insensitivenetwork.com, as well as on Spotify, Spreaker.com, iTunes, Google Music, and others. Be sure to subscribe for the latest episodes. This, of course, is the midweek episode, so it's Sans persona, no White Rabbit. He is still doing his research for his new shows, which are released every Saturday. And of course, the midweek episodes are really geared just towards some headlines and interesting tinfoil bits that I've come across and felt like I should share with you. This is episode 1.3, Radiation, Satellites, and Bears. Oh my. So taking a look at the Chernobyl nuclear reactor, scientists back in 1991 found a particular type of black fungus that they believed to actually consume the radiation that was within the area. What I found so intriguing about this story is that we're actually reading about it now in 2020. So there's been quite a bit of time that has passed since they actually discovered the fungus. Adding to the mystery on that, they apparently studied this fungus for 10 years, which 10 years from 91 would have been 2001. Here we are in 2020, and we're just talking about it now. So the scientists apparently studied this fungus, and what they found is that it was actually consuming the radiation inside the radioactive zone. And after further research, they found that this particular type of black fungus had a extremely large amount of the pigment melanin. Now, as most of you know, melanin is the same pigment that's also found in the skin of humans. People with darker skin tones tend to have much more melanin than people with lighter skin tones. Now, the people with darker skin tones that contain more melanin also seem to absorb light and dissipate ultraviolet radiation better than those with less melanin. However, what these scientists discovered in this black fungi is that it not only absorbed the radiation, but it also converted it into some type of chemical energy for its growth. So that would seem to indicate that there could be other places on not only this planet, but also in space, that organisms could live and thrive in a radiation-filled environment. So it would seem that we can add places like Chernobyl to the list of previously unthinkable areas on this planet, at least, where life could thrive. Another example of this was many years ago, scientists found that down at the bottom of the ocean, around, say, the Ring of Fire, where there were extremely high temperatures and a mix of what we believed to be relatively poisonous gases. Yet, once we were finally able to get down and see this environment, what we found was a plethora of life. So what does this black radiation-eating fungus seem to suggest? Well, space, as we've been told, is full of cosmic radiation. Now, most of that radiation is actually deflected by the Earth's magnetic shield, and an example of that would be the aurora borealis. However, finding bacteria, or fungus at least, in the Chernobyl area seems to suggest that, well, life could definitely exist in extreme conditions that had high radiation levels. Now, scientists also believe that when the Earth was forming its magnetic shield, in what was called a magnetic zero period of our history, that there were actually many species of plant and fungal spores that could actually thrive on that cosmic radiation. So if we turn to Wikipedia and we do a little research here, let's look up Chernobyl fungus. And of course, there's something here: radiotrophic fungi. Radiotrophic fungi, according to Wikipedia, are fungi which appear to perform radiosynthesis, that is, to use the pigment melanin to convert gamma radiation into chemical energy for growth. Now, scientists also believe that their research showed that there are actually 3 melanin-containing fungi that increased in size faster in a radiation-filled environment, and even faster at a level of 500 times faster in areas that had extremely high radiation, such as Chernobyl. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm just about convinced. As a matter of fact, I am now 100% convinced that not only is there life in environments that are what we consider to be uninhabitable here on Earth, but also life out in space, not only on other planets, but possibly on other stars, because stars are basically balls of burning radiation. But there could be life inside of outer space in general. Now, this seems to suggest that life could pretty much exist in just about every extreme condition that we could think of. And while we haven't necessarily found complex life forms, such as ourselves or another alien race, we have definitely found microbes, bacteria, fungi, etc., that are able to survive these extreme conditions. So some examples of what kinds of conditions we're talking about here is extreme temperature exposures, extreme pressure exposures, both high and low, air deprivation, radiation, dehydration, starvation. I mean, what these things have to eat something, you would think. Ruling out life forms in any type of extreme condition, or at least what we would consider to be an extreme condition, is definitely no longer possible. So staying on the subject of microorganisms and space, years ago scientists were able to determine that certain microorganisms were able to survive a launch into space and the return trip back. What they haven't been able to determine is whether or not microorganisms actually attach themselves to something like the space shuttle and return to Earth. There is also another theory that suggests that a sort of cosmic dust containing these organisms is constantly falling into Earth's atmosphere, and this is called panspermia, which means that life exists throughout the universe, and it is distributed by space dust, meteoroids, asteroids, comets, and indeed by spacecraft. Now, this panspermia hypothesis seems to suggest that microscopic life forms can survive the effects of outer space. These are called extremophiles, and they can become trapped in things like debris ejected into space after maybe a collision between planets, or maybe the organisms may travel dormant for some amount of time, whether they come from our planet and go into space, or come from space onto our planet attached to things like maybe the space shuttle. Now, I seem to remember a story a couple of years back where scientists had actually confirmed this, and one of these microorganisms, or extremophiles as they call them, happens to be a little creature called a water bear. Scientists call them tardigrades, and what they are is a water-dwelling, 8-legged, segmented microanimal, according to Wikipedia. Now, they were first discovered by a German zoologist back in 1773, and they have been found just about everywhere, from mountaintops to deep sea levels to mud volcanoes, tropical rainforests, Antarctica, and yes, even surviving the trip to space and back. So basically, just about everything that would kill every other form of life that we know, these little creatures are able to survive. So with the recent discovery of this radiation-eating fungi and the already known fact that tardigrades are able to survive trips to space and back, leads me to pretty much believe that there is definitely some kind of life that is out there somewhere. Now, will it be a complex form of life, such as us, or is it confined to these microorganisms? We'll have to wait to find out, but my guess is that somewhere out there is definitely a complex organism surviving in space in an extreme environment that we would consider to be uninhabitable. And the next thing that caught my attention this past week was Elon Musk. Now, Elon Musk, we could probably do an entire show on. He is just full of tinfoil, and I think he's just one strange dude. I really do. I just think Elon Musk is just, I'm not sure if he's genius or if he is just completely insane and off the rails. But in either case, he has a lot of money. So, genius or crazy, he can pretty much do anything that he wants. Apparently what he's doing now is he is launching thousands of satellites into outer space for a plan to bring worldwide internet to everybody on the face of the planet, no matter where you are, through his SpaceX program. Now, one of the reasons why this particular article caught my attention is because there is an astronomer out of Ohio State University, I believe, who is actually complaining that Elon Musk is, quote, polluting the skies. Somebody puts up a shed that might obstruct my view by a foot, I can protest. But somebody can launch thousands of satellites into the sky, and there's nothing I can do. As a citizen of Earth, I was like, wait a minute. Now, I have to tell you that I agree with that. The thought of having our night skies being blocked by these satellites apparently is a extremely large problem. Astronomers using telescopes are finding that the satellites are obstructing their view, or they're leaving white, kind of like white streaks across their field of view when they're doing their studies and observations with different types of telescopes. Think of it kind of like a contrail that you see from an airplane as it's flying through the sky. This apparently is causing a similar effect, except it's actually blocking out whatever is behind it, because once you see that light there, the telescopes can no longer see past that particular area. Basically, what you end up with is a bunch of images online of their telescopes with fields of view that have a diagonal white streak cutting across the darkness, and the distinct appearance of Starlink satellites. That's what the project is called, Project Starlink, from Elon Musk, the kind of weird dude. So from the ground, these Starlink satellites appear as points of moving light from the west to the east, kind of like a tiny string of pearls, so to speak, across the night sky. Apparently, some people have even mistaken these lights for UFOs. The satellites are their brightest after they're launched, before they spread out, and then they rise in altitude and are visible even in the middle of cities. So even with all that light pollution, you can still see these satellites after they've been launched into their orbit before they reach their final orbit, which is a little bit higher. So what happens is they appear dimmer after a few months after they reach that final orbit, which according to Wikipedia is about 340 some odd miles. But even then, they can still be seen if you're in a non-light polluted, dark area away from that glare of the light pollution, so to speak. So SpaceX is actively working with leading astronomy groups from all over the place, trying to make sure that their work isn't affected. Not space works, but the astronomers' work isn't affected by these satellites. One satellite in a batch of 60 launched back earlier, just a few weeks ago in January, had some kind of an experimental coating on it that might make it less reflective. They actually won't know until the satellite reaches its final orbit. But as it waits for more data, SpaceX is actually continuing to launch dozens of these satellites at a time. The company actually wants to deploy upwards of 1,500 satellites just in this year alone, 2020. 1,500 just in 2020. Now that means that there's a launch like every few weeks. So yeah, this program from Musk is just kind of crazy. The FCC has approved the launching of 12,000 of these Starlink satellites. 12,000 people. SpaceX wants to actually launch 30,000 more. So by the end of this year, 2020, the company plans to be operational with all the satellites in orbit. And that being the case, they would actually outnumber all of the other satellites that are currently up there now combined. Think about that. One man is going to launch in 1 year enough satellites to outnumber the total number of satellites from every country, every government agency around the globe in 1 year. There's another company called OneWeb. They're actually set to launch a batch of their own internet satellites, and their proposal is somewhere around 650 satellites. And of course, Jeff Bezos from Amazon, he's got to get in on the action. He's asked the FCC for permission to launch a network of somewhere around 3,200 internet satellites. Elon Musk is just absolutely determined to get to Mars. So I can see where he would be planning to launch like a string of these satellites that would lead to Mars to provide internet access on Mars. I wonder what kind of speed that would get. Interesting. So just taking a look here at Wikipedia on Starlink, something really kind of caught my eye here. It says that their constellation of satellites will consist of thousands of mass-produced small satellites. Mass-produced. Think about that. Whenever you've seen a satellite being constructed, it's always in what's called a clean room. So everybody is in the full white suits with the goggles and the gloves, and it's a sterile environment, or at least as sterile of an environment as we can possibly create, because everything is really dependent on having proper seals. So just one grain of dirt, for example, or dust can break a seal on something and cause whatever it is that they're building to fail. Mass-produced satellites. We are just getting way further ahead from a technological standpoint than I think most people would have ever guessed, because mass-produced cars was a big thing. Now we can mass-produce satellites. Interesting. As of February 8th of this year, 2020, SpaceX has launched, and this is according to Wikipedia, 242 satellites. So they're planning to launch 60 more per Falcon 9 rocket. That's their big rocket that they launch and are able to now bring back to Earth and land on a landing pad, so it lands upright. These launches are scheduled to take place every 3 weeks in 2020. Every 3 weeks. So in total, it's 12,000 satellites by the middle of this year, and then possibly later. Now Wikipedia states 42,000. The article that I was looking at earlier said somewhere around 30,000. So, and again, commercial operation they're hoping is going to begin in 2020. Now, I find that interesting that they're saying that operations could begin in 2020, because if you go to the Starlink website, there's absolutely no info there at all. Nothing useful. There's nothing to click on. Nothing. Zero. It's just one page that has some images that scroll either left or right, depending on where you're at on the page. It addresses things like space junk in about a, 1.5 paragraph article next to a picture. They also state in there that these satellites, they re-enter the atmosphere and they burn up every 1 to 5 years. Okay, so we're going to launch upwards of 42,000 of these things, and every 1 to 5 years, these things are going to fail. They're going to fall back into Earth's orbit, and they're going to burn up. That, to me, just seems like really, really odd. And it also means that there's just going to be a continual launch of these things. And 1 year, who puts a lifespan of 1 year on something unless you're a billionaire like Musk? Absolutely unbelievable. Plus, not even to mention that the amount of energy and resources that are required in order to launch one of these Falcon 9s, just to get these satellites out into space to provide internet service, I'm not really sure what the trade-off is on that. There's got to be something in it that I'm not seeing here, because the resources and energy we're using to put these things up there just seems way too large for what the overall project's end product is going to be. These satellites, too, by the way, also have ion propulsion units with an automatic collision avoidance system on board. So apparently, if you're going into outer space now, since there's going to be upwards to 42,000 of these things, and all the other stuff that's up there, plus all the other space junk that's up there, auto collision avoidance is probably going to be required. So that should give you guys a couple of things to chew on for a couple of days or so. I'm going to go back deep down into my tinfoil rabbit hole. We'll be working with the White Rabbit on this week's episode. I know that this week is going to be something having to do with RF-free communities. So that'll give you a little bit of a clue as to what the White Rabbit will be discussing this coming Saturday. I want to thank you all for listening again. And don't forget to subscribe if you like this episode. Tell your friends. Tell everybody. We also have merchandise that you can check out. Again, that's insensitivenetwork.com. You can take a look at our great merchandise with our wonderful logo. Love the logo. Looks great. Also, don't forget to visit insensitivenetwork.com, and you can find some great other podcasts there. Happy Ever After Party by Sam. A wonderful program. If you like this one, I'm sure you're going to enjoy that one. And of course, Matt's Totally Insensitive podcast is up there as well. And of course, this coming Saturday, we'll have the latest episode featuring the White Rabbit. So, on that note, my name is Steve, and once again, thank you for listening to the Tinfoil Rabbit Hole.
Where the hell is Tesla?